All right. Hello, Baseline Explorers, staff of the Stanford site, and also folks from Verily. My name is Michael Magdaleno. I'm a program manager at Verily, supporting our clinical study participants, including all of you for the past several years in the Project Baseline Health Study. And we're here today to kick off our webinar, Baseline Explorers Continuing the Journey. I'll hand things over to Dr. Kenneth Mahaffey to continue, but welcome everyone.
Great, thanks a lot, Michael. Good evening, everyone. Fantastic to be on yet, on yet another event like this to really celebrate the tremendous successes of the partnership that we've had between Stanford and Duke and Verily, and your incredible commitments to the Project Baseline Health Study. It's been quite the journey, and we've done a lot of incredibly productive work, both in the scientific domain, in the methodological domain, and understanding how to do this kind of research, in the community building domain. And then finally, and most importantly, I think we've had a little fun along the way. And I hope you all would agree. I know the teams at Duke and Stanford and Verily certainly have had a lot of fun, a lot of hard work, but a lot of fun as well. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for spending some time with us this evening. Next slide. So this evening, we'd like to cover a few things. One is looking back our journey so far, and what we really have been able to accomplish, and it's truly been extraordinary. Looking forward and what comes next. And then hear what's on your minds. What questions or comments do you have about your participation in Project Baseline Health Study and what you can do to continue to support this or other good research in the local communities? As you can see here on the slide, please submit questions to Q&A. We'll try and keep them answered as we go along, or maybe bring some of the most common ones to the open forum here at the end of the presentation. Next. So I just want to remind you why we are here, and I think you'll probably be getting tired of seeing this slide every time you see Ken Mahaffey giving a presentation. But I continue to like this slide, and over time, the reason I like this slide has evolved, but it really fundamentally shows both the importance and the impact of evidence generation. And that's what clinical research is all about. It's all about generating data, empiric observations, information that can help us better understand devices, drugs, biology of disease, implementation of new therapies or ways of delivering healthcare. We do those investigations and clinical studies like we did with the Project Baseline. We then analyze the data and publish them in the peer review literature, and where applicable, they're incorporated into our guidelines, our practice guidelines. This is the guidelines that tell physicians about how to treat specific diseases. And then we know that if we follow the guidelines, we can perform better as doctors and we can improve our patient outcomes. The second thing that's critically important with this evidence generation or cycle of evidence generation and implementation is we now focus heavily on having the participant of the research at the center of everything we do. And I think we've been incredibly fortunate to do that in Project Baseline. Next slide. How did we do it? Well, from the very beginning of Project Baseline, we considered potential participants in the study as partners in the entire research effort. We engaged with potential participants. We educated them about what we wanted to do. And then we empowered them, the 3 E's, to help us better design the study so that it made sense. We had advocacy groups at the very beginning to address certain aspects of the protocol and the scientific inquiries. We had community advisory boards that many of you may have participated on. And we also had the Return of Results Committee that thought very centrally about how we engage in research participants to give the results of the assessments that we were doing and the results of the science that we were generating. And then through all of this, we had a key focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion across broad geographic areas, sex, race, ethnicity, and other parameters that describe different populations in our own communities, in fact, across the United States, involved with clinical research. Next. I do want to take a moment again to recognize that Dr. Sam Gambier, who was the original principal investigator at Stanford, passed away during Project Baseline. But Sam was more than just the principal investigator here. He was a true visionary, and the mission of his research throughout his long academic career was to really better understand how we can identify the transitions from health to disease so that we can better identify molecular markers, devices, or interventions that would allow us to either prevent those transitions from health to disease or to treat them as early as possible. Sam was a kind and generous man. When I came to Stanford in 2013, he took me under his wing as the Project Baseline was just a sparkle in his eye and a few others. And he really was one of the champions and driving forces that galvanized the relationship, particularly with Rob Califf at Duke at the time, Andy Conrad at Google Health Sciences at the time, to really gain the support and the momentum that really got Project Baseline started. And I'm so proud that we have been able to complete the journey now 3 years after his unfortunate passing. And I hope he's looking down and enjoying the celebration as much as we are tonight. Next slide. But Sam knew that this whole endeavor was much more than just one person. It was about a team. And as I reflect on Sam's incredible contributions to Stanford in the scientific field, I'm internally grateful for what he did for me as a person. Next slide. But also what he did for all of us. This is how it all started. And this was part of Sam's vision to try and bring everybody together in a community. And for those of you who were able to attend this initial session in 2018, you'll remember that we had live streaming from other centers across the country that were involved, from Duke, from Kannapolis, from Southern California. And we really had a great time sharing ideas and ongoing activities and accomplishments with each other across the United States. Next. Many of you may have seen these already. This is really an idea of who we were able to recruit in the Project Baseline Health Study. These are the 1,002 participants that were enrolled at Stanford out of the 2,502 that we enrolled in all centers across the United States. Remember that we set out to try and mimic the US Census on specific race and ethnicity parameters, and I think we did a wonderful job of doing that, with nearly 17% of the population Asian at Stanford, 7% were Black, and 53% were female, where women are often underrepresented in clinical trials. And we also enrolled a broad spectrum of participants defined by age. So really a tremendous accomplishment. And now for all that you did and all of the team did at Stanford, at Arastradero and other places where you had assessments done, we had 7,109. Just think about that for a minute. 7,109 total study visits and over 2,200 virtual visits. So really an incredible amount of work over 6 years. And one of the numbers that I'm most proud of is the retention to date. Over 96% retention over 6 years of clinical studies. That's really unheard of. And it is a testimony to the commitment, effort, and dedication that all of you as participants provided and dedicated to the study. But I know the team is going to be a little anxious when I start talking about them, because we all know that it's about you, the participants, that made this successful. But we really had an incredibly dedicated team that worked hard, as you all did through the pandemic, change things on the fly, adhere to local government policies and procedures during the pandemic, and were able to continue the assessments throughout the entire time of the pandemic and the study. Next slide. And here are those numbers a little bit more defined in terms of compliance with the actual study visits that were completed. 88 visits were completed at 1 year, and 87, almost zero drop off 3 years later for annual visits 4. Really a tremendous accomplishment. And when you compare this kind of study visit completion to other in-person longitudinal cohort studies like this, this is truly extraordinary. Next slide. And here's a slide. I'm not going to go through it, but it really is quite staggering, the total number of data points that we've been able to collect. Remember, you've heard the number, about 6 terabytes of data on each participant at baseline, and a nearly comparable amount of data at each of the annual visits and in the interim assessments with the wearable devices and all the surveys that you collected. This is really, really astounding in terms of the number of steps that were taken. 19.7 billion. That's just unbelievable when you think about numbers that high. 41,000 surveys, 3.5 million meters walked. It's really amazing. And now when you look at the difference between the total number of counts in the overall study on the top row of each circle and what was done at Stanford, I'm really proud of the fact that even though we were only 40% of all of the participants, we've got more than 40% of the data in most of the circles. So you've really contributed a lot to this study, and a higher proportion than we maybe had when we had anticipated. And I think it's in part due to your tremendous commitment to the study. Next. And as you know, we have been working very hard, thanks to Shannon and Sarah and many others at Verily, who have been the champions internally to keep the support for us to do analyses from all of the data that you collected and be able to contribute important contributions to the scientific literature. And you can see here examples of some of the publications that have been done around the diabetes, around coronary artery calcium measurements. Next slide. Looking at the use of wearable devices and how they can be integrated in the community and in participants like yourself. We've talked about general anxiety disorders and other psychosocial issues. Next slide. And we've done a lot of work, and I think some really seminal contributions in better understanding subtle changes on the ultrasounds or echocardiograms that you performed to help identify heart failure in earlier stages that can help with ongoing studies and hopefully in the future, better ways to take care of patients. Next slide. This is a list of a lot of the engagement events that we've had throughout the years. And I hope that many of you have been able to participate on them. I've known that when I've been able to sit back and relax and listen to these wonderful speakers, I've learned a lot. And they've really been a diverse group of lectures and investigators that have provided their time to help support the education of the entire Project Baseline community. All of these are archived on the Stanford Center for Clinical Research YouTube channel. So all you need to do is subscribe and you can download these if you haven't had a chance to see these in the past. Next slide. So thanks for listening. I'll jump into the Q&A and make sure there's no questions that I need to answer, but I'm going to hand it over to my good friend and colleague, Shannon Sullivan, to talk about what lies ahead. Shannon, thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. And just on behalf of everybody on the Verily team, it has been such an honor and such a privilege to work with the Stanford Baseline Health Study team. What an incredible team. And I know the participants who are on this webinar tonight know that firsthand. But I mean, it is a dream team. You just couldn't ask to work with a better group of researchers and participants. I just thank each and every one of you for taking the time tonight, and also for all the dedication you've had over these last 6 years. So I'm going to take the baton and talk a little bit about planned changes for the Baseline Health Study as we move forward. And that's going to start with actually going back to those early days. There was always part of this vision where after this number of years of in-person assessments that we would transition to a virtual format. And now we're arriving at that moment. That change is underway. So as the study visits come to a close, and put a pin in that for a second, Baseline will enter into its long-term follow-up phase, and then Verily will become the remote site thereafter for the study. So again, I mean, this slide says it, but it really just can't be stated enough that this has been an amazing journey so far, and I wholly know that it will continue as we dig in together to the data that's been collected so far, as well as continue to collect data with researchers at Duke and Stanford, and the broader research community. So this is a very exciting time for us. Now, I said put a pin in it because I've seen a couple of comments already coming in. The Stanford, as Dr. Mahaffey mentioned, not every single person at this moment has had that last site visit. So there's a percentage of people who are still scheduled, and maybe in Q&A, Samantha can jump in, but just to let you know, if you have questions about that, stay tuned. So let's take a look. Next slide. It's some of these changes. So what do we mean by fully virtual experience? The first thing is that those surveys that you have been receiving and completing quarterly, those will continue. We will continue to have study update webinars as well as newsletters. And that will be the best way to find out about new research opportunities in addition to our webpage. And it's so exciting. We're just sort of at this cusp in the life cycle of the study of having accumulated all of this amazing and really novel data. We're just at this moment of new research discovery. And so some of those papers that Dr. Mahaffey mentioned in his talk, those are just published. And so really open up those newsletters. What we're asking authors to do when they are publishing using your data, the Project Baseline Health Study data, is to write a synopsis of their work meant for the newsletter in particular, so that you can be updated as we go forward around these new discoveries. And I think if some of you are part of the Study Watch webinar in the fall, you know, it's also our intention to bring together researchers and participants so that we can continue this dialogue in other formats as well. Next slide. So again, getting back to this fully virtual, what does this all mean? It does mean that the on-site in-person visits after Stanford's last day for in-person visits, which we have not passed yet, after that happens, these in-person visits will be complete, so they will not occur into the future. But study participation definitely can continue. And this participation is voluntary, as always. So we invite you to continue the journey with us. And what that will mean is receiving information about opportunities to participate in future research. As some of you may be familiar, we've had one such research study like that, the Colgate study, where some participants were recruited into a separate study. We will be posting those opportunities whenever possible on the projectbaseline.com website. And some of these things may involve testing out new tools and technologies, which the Project Baseline Health Study participants are very familiar with. And I agree with Ken. My favorite figure on your page of numbers, Dr. Mahaffey, was that almost half of all Study Watch hours were at Stanford participants. So it's pretty amazing. Over 10 million hours of Study Watch wear out of Stanford, which is just so incredible. And then finally, you will continue to receive communications about webinars, newsletters, updates to the study, research updates, and this kind of thing. Next slide. So what is that date? I mentioned we haven't passed that date yet. For Stanford, that date is September 30th. So after September 30th or starting September 30th, Verily Life Sciences will take over as this remote study site, your study site, in the virtual long-term follow-up phase of the study. We will provide oversight of the study and ongoing remote study activities. Some of those are going to feel very familiar to you, for example, through the portal and through the app. But importantly, Stanford at that point will no longer be available to answer Project Baseline Health Study questions. Of course, you can continue to reach out to the team at Verily by phone or email, and we have that posted on the last slide, but I think I have it memorized. It's 8555 baseline. So if you are wondering or have any questions, please do feel free to reach out. And if you have any questions about results from on-site visits or other concerns related to on-site visits, for sure, your Stanford team is your first stop up through September 30th. And the reason to have the webinar at this moment is so that there's time to wrap up those questions and have an opportunity to do that. Next slide. So I wanted to the importance of partnership and team is absolutely central in this really groundbreaking effort, amazing effort. And so I wanted to take a moment to honor, or if you don't know them, to introduce some of the Verily team to you, some of the folks behind the scenes. I don't know if everybody was able to make it tonight, but our latest addition is a fellow clinical science team member. That's Dr. Scooter Plowman, who's on the call right now. Scooter, do you want to wave and say hi? Probably be seeing more from him in coming times. Yep. And who else do we have? Who else from Project Baseline Health Study on the Verily side do we have who might want to say hello? I know who you are.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashton Madison. I am a program manager who's been working on the study for the past year. So excited to have you all on board with us. Thanks.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Ong. I'm also a program manager at Verily. I've been working very closely with Shannon and Dr. Mahaffey on this program for the last 2.5 years or so.
And Scooter, I totally cut you off. I apologize.
No problem at all. I'm new to the team, and it's an honor to be involved. Honestly, this is a terrific opportunity. I know. Thank you for making it. You can see I have a little one with me myself, so thank you for taking your evening to be with us this evening.
All right. Well, let's keep moving. And Next slide. And so just a few more things. These are like kind of some practical tips. You may notice at this transition a little change in the cadence of study surveys as we move over, but in general, those surveys will continue the quarterly cadence that they've always had. One really big difference is that the surveys will no longer be paid. These will be voluntary, but there will be no compensation for them after the September 30th date. And then if you have any unclaimed payments or questions about past compensation, please contact the support team. This is a really important one because we'd like to try to settle up and make sure that we've been able to provide every last participant with every payment or compensation that ought to be coming to them. A couple other things. So color, if you did participate in the color genomics opportunity through Project Baseline Health Study, you will continue to have access to the color genomics information and updates that occur regularly. So if you've already set up an account for that, you will continue to receive that. That will not sunset. And then we mentioned Study Watch before, and this is an avid Study Watch community. But if you have a Study Watch at home, be it in the back of the sock drawer, or if you're a diehard and that thing is on your wrist, we are collecting those, and we would be most happy to receive those. You can return them via mail mainly, unless you're one of those individuals that still has an upcoming annual visit, in which case you can drop it off with your site. Samana, correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I think we can still accept those if you have a scheduled site visit. Please don't drop them off willy-nilly. We'd be happy to receive those via mail. And if you'd like to organize that, you can call the 1-8555-BASELINE phone number or email us at healthstudy@projectbaseline.com, and we can help get that set up for you. And thank you so much again, with great appreciation. The Study Watch has been an absolute, actually has really added an additional dimension to the Baseline Health Study effort and our insights that really is novel. And stay connected with us. We invite you to continue to look at the Baseline app for updates and new information. Our member portal will stay active, and we'll continue to make updates there. And then again, is our email address and our phone number. We're always happy to field any questions that you may have during this transition and in the future state, and we welcome that. Here's a to do. It will be very important to keep your contact information updated, because this is going to be the main way that we continue to stay in touch with you. So please update your address, your phone number, your preferred method of contact, your backup contact person directly through the survey that you can find. Here's a screenshot of what that looks like. Please note, if you do update that, the email update will not take place immediately. So that does fall into a work queue, so that a study team member will review it and then confirm the change directly with you within 7 days by email. And that updated email should be a primary email address that you own directly. And certainly we don't expect our emails to be landing in spam if they haven't before. But if you don't get that follow-up email after you make your updated change, please reach out to us so we can understand what might have happened there. Which, it's so not surprisingly, the other reminder is keep an eye on that inbox. You will receive an email from Verily providing additional information for the ongoing Project Baseline Health Study activities. You'll be getting such an email around that September 30th timeframe for sure. Remember that Verily will be your new remote study site after that date. But for a small number of individuals, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, you may be getting an email earlier than that as we adjudicate, for example, the version of the consent that you signed and all of these other things. So there are a few folks who might be hearing from us before then, so that we can enable this long-term follow-up for every interested participant. We would love, my gosh, the rate of folks who have remained involved in this study is just completely impressive. I've never seen anything like it before. And we want to make sure that we enable every single person who would like to stay part of the study to be able to do that. And once again, there's our phone number and our email address, 8555-BASELINE and healthstudy@projectbaseline.com. If you have any questions or would like to follow up with us in any way, we always have open ears. And one more, let's advance one more slide. I know we're going to open it up to the Q&A here. Just thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. This has been an incredible journey. And I wasn't here for many of these pictures, and I can tell you it's just so much can be said in some of these images. What an amazing community, Dr. Mahaffey and Samana, that you have for the Project Baseline Health Studies Stanford site. We have one more slide. Let's take a minute to honor some of these great pictures. Trip down memory lane. And I think one more. Yes, I knew we'd get to it. So I know this is a group of individuals who are really interested in contributing to scientific research and to better health in the future. And so I wanted to make sure maybe Dr. Mahaffey, you want to introduce this, but we will be posting new opportunities through projectbaseline.com, but also there are additional opportunities at Stanford. And so I thought it might be worthwhile to call that out. Dr. Mahaffey, do you want to introduce these?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Shannon. And you can call me Ken after all these years. Appreciate it. We hope that you'll continue to be part of the virtual aspect of the Project Baseline Health Study that Verily will be managing. We're obviously at Stanford disappointed that the Project Baseline won't continue with engagement of you all at the site level in some way, shape, or form. But we do think there's a lot that still can be learned from the data collected and the virtual follow-up that Verily is planning. We just wanted to make sure that all of you locally, if you have an interest in participating in other research activities at Stanford, there are a number of ways that you can identify potential programs. There is a Stanford Research Registry that you can sign up for with informed consent that collects some information about you and then you give permission for any Stanford investigators to reach out to you if they have studies in any area that you might be interested in or disease that you may have or have an interest in. There are also links that can be found on study pages, which is a social media platform that promotes clinical research, and Stanford contributes to that platform when investigators want to share ongoing studies that they are looking for recruitment in the local area. And then finally, you can look at clinicaltrials.stanford.edu, and it is also a repository that can be searched of ongoing clinical research activities where recruitment is still happening, and you may be of interest based on the information that's provided. So thank you for considering continued research participation in Project Baseline Health Study and other opportunities that we would have for you at Stanford. I'll hand it back to you, Shannon.
Thanks, Ken. And let's go back one slide. There we go. And perfect. I love the Baseline Explorer slide with the maximum pictures. Maybe that's a good one for there you go, for our Q&A. And maybe what we can do is open it. Shout out to Michael and others who are answering questions in the Q&A on the Zoom in real time. Let's see if we have any in particular. I think someone did have a question if they still had an outstanding in-person visit about returning the study watch. As far as I know, if your in-person visit is scheduled between now and September 30th and you have not yet returned your study watch, you can bring it into the site and return it that way.
And for those for whom the last visit has passed, and that is if you're not scheduled for a visit within the next couple of weeks, the best thing to do would be to contact the support team at healthstudy@projectbaseline.com in order to initiate a return by mail. Please do not, if you do not have a scheduled visit, please do not drop off a device or set of devices on site. I also wanted to address one question that I had partially answered in text, in line, but then was not able to make any changes, so I withdrew the whole comment. And that was about the location of publications. So we've tried to share research insights that have been published as they're released, typically through Project Baseline newsletters in the Explore tab of the Project Baseline app, or in the form of webinars. So it may be possible that you missed one or all of those opportunities in the past. We will continue to share research insights and publications via those means going forward. So that's newsletters, the Project Baseline app, and then through one-off events and webinars like this one.
Shannon, maybe you could help. I mean, there's a number of questions that people have answered in text, but I thought we should bring it up since the people have been asking about, and in fact, some people have outright indicated they're disappointed with the amount of information that we've provided back in terms of results for various tests. And I acknowledge that. Maybe I'll give a top level, and then maybe you could, Shannon, provide some insights about some of the specific assays that we've been talking about recently. We are still committed as a research group that has led Project Baseline Health Study for the last 5 or 6 years to sharing as much information as we possibly can. That is still our fundamental principle. And we want to live up to that goal that we set for ourselves and the entire community. What we have learned is that sharing information like this that is both clinical grade material, that clinical grade information, as well as research information, is really hard and takes a lot of effort, because sharing information without being responsible in terms of helping participants understand what the information means, and more importantly, having systems in place so that participants can get answers quickly, particularly when there's significant abnormalities such as new lesions on a chest X-ray, or abnormalities on an echocardiogram that might need to be treated urgently. And we are still trying to understand how to put in place some of those kind of support systems, if you will, for some of the additional information that we want to share with you. And we're still working out. Obviously, if any information that we've gotten from the clinical assessments had anything that was abnormal that needed to be shared with anybody, you will have heard about it already. But it's this other research grade assessments that we've done that are still going through some additional thought about how we can responsibly share it with you and your providers if needed. Shannon, did you have anything to add to that, and then maybe share some of your thoughts on specific assays?
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. I couldn't say it better, but that's exactly right. First of all, amazingly, the study has returned over 28,000 individualized results to participants in the study. So it's certainly the case. I would like to echo, Ken, what you said about the commitment to returning results. We also have, as Ken mentioned earlier, a return of results committee largely made up of folks not directly involved in the day-to-day governance of the study, to provide us with backgrounds, for example, from ethics, who help us to work through some of the challenging questions when it comes to the best way to support participants in getting results, to make sure that we are holding ourselves to the highest standard possible. For sure, the difficult, and most of those 28,000 that I mentioned are these clinically interpretable results. They're results that are used in the practice of medicine, and we can understand when we look at that result what might be some next courses of action. These have a pathway for sharing. Where it gets tricky is in the domain of research. When even we as researchers have equipoise or are still learning about what a particular result might indicate or might not. We might not have all of the information we need to be able to approach this from a research perspective as well as from a clinical perspective. And that's where it's challenging to return those as individual results. Where you can look to see how the study is approaching those is in the research publications that are coming out. So you'll see the presence of some of these other types of assays that you may have participated in coming out in the research publications. Now, that those are not returned at the individual level because of these issues around either FDA clearance for the test or individual interpretability. But as we are learning ourselves, we want all of us, this is a community of participants and researchers together to be understanding what the implications of some of these things are. So we're at that edge of learning all the time. And it's this that I think won't be slowing down. I actually think that we're at this moment where we can see an acceleration in our understanding of some of those things. As for a particular test, Ken, that was the other part of your question. As Ken knows, we have active discussions as we are thinking about how to adjudicate this type of information as we get in research proposals. I don't have any particular examples of that, but I can tell you over the time that I've been part of Baseline Health Study and as a sleep medicine physician, individualized results for sleep is something that has just a ton of interest. And you can imagine my passion in this space. We're right now finishing up a performance testing study against polysomnography, which is an overnight sleep study for the sleep metrics and the study watch. And so again, we're running at this just as hard as we can, but we just haven't been able to deliver those as individualized results until we know that we have the accuracy and the performance testing results that make those meaningful. Yeah, and here's another question, Ken. I'd love to chat about this one with you. This one is, how much of the study was compromised by the massive reduction in-person tests during the pandemic, like removing all the respiratory and cardiac tests to later years? I would like to start this one off and maybe hand the baton to you, Ken. I think what would have constituted a massive loss for the study is if we had lost participation permanently. The most, again, just kind of jaw-dropping findings or learnings of navigating through the pandemic. And this in no part was due to an incredibly nimble, incredibly creative research teams and participants working together to make the study happen. But we maintained participation through those pandemic years. And when you're in it for the long haul, when you're in it to understand longitudinal health and changes, having that little blind spot is nothing compared to having the long-term data. And so because we didn't lose participants, I feel like this in large part is highly navigatable. Ken, any particular reflections, and Samana, on what it was like going through those particular years?
Yeah, I'll answer it from a scientific perspective, and then Sumana, maybe you could talk about the impact it had on the team and the participants that you interacted with. Obviously, as a scientist, anytime you lose data that you were planning on collecting, it's disappointing because you wouldn't have planned to collect it if you didn't think it was important, right? That's one of the fundamental tenets of doing clinical research. But I think that, in fact, COVID, even though we weren't able to collect information about participants as much as we had planned, just the fact that we now have data on people before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID is going to give us an opportunity to look at information about how COVID affected people from a variety of different perspectives. We can look at the inflammatory process. We can look at functional aspects. We can look at socioeconomic factors. And you may say, well, why haven't you done it already? The pandemic's hopefully nearing its end. Well, because we wanted to have these last visits all collected and the data clean before we started looking at the changes during and after COVID. So although some disappointment that we don't have all the data that we planned, I do think that while unfortunate, the pandemic is going to provide us with an opportunity to look at how the both the virus, both the infections that people had, but also the impact of all of the things that we had to do to prevent infections had on our individual participants and the community and a broader perspective. Sumana, do you have something you might want to add here?
Yeah, and just for those of you who are on the call, my name is Sumana. I have the pleasure of working with the team that you see on an annual basis when you come in for your visits or when you encounter them on virtual calls. For us, a lot of the information that was so valuable and so critical was the self-reported information that you provided. And so when the pandemic hit and we closed down, our first focus was to gear and find a way to reestablish that connection with you and to never lose it. And so I know that my team and I sent out a number of newsletters to let you know what we were doing to get the study back up and running as quickly as possible. But, to Ken's point and to Shannon's point, we also pivoted and tried to see if we could leverage the technologies that were gaining ascendancy during that period to be able to make connections with you, and hence the virtual visits were born. And I know that from the time we shut down in March, the team worked incredibly hard to start the first of these visits by October of that year. And thanks to you guys, you sort of leaned into it with us. And as a result, we were able to keep that connection, continue to get that valuable information from you, and work on bringing you in when it was safe and when it was possible to also continue the in-person visits. So thank you all for that.
Now, we also did collect questions ahead of time, if I'm not mistaken. Michael, are there any questions that with topics that we haven't covered that we might hear folks?
There are a few, and I can kind of cycle through them and share some of the answers that we have put down ahead of time. So what were the results of the study watch? Today we did touch on watch wear, step count, and meters walked. We've also presented previously on findings from study watch during an October 2022 event. And as more results become available from the study watch data, we plan to keep the participant population informed via webinars, newsletters, and the app as described. So please stay tuned. Another question that we saw aspects of in questions today, will there be more releases of both individual data and science data? And while we don't foresee further opportunities to return individual clinically validated data, we do plan to return aggregate results by researchers via app, newsletter, and webinar, as mentioned. So this is just another opportunity to keep your contact information up to date so that you can be kept in the loop ongoing. I think another thing that I've addressed in a couple of the questions today that we've received as well that I think is worth sharing with the broader audience is that there was only about four years of participation data collection for participants, but that data, those data sets will continue to be used for years into the future and will continue to generate research and medical insights for years from now. We're really only getting started. It's the tip of the iceberg.
Michael, I wanted to add in another one. I think I saw this somewhere in the chat. Are there any immediate plans for issuance of new remote devices or trackers? And the answer to that question, which you probably already wrote there, is no. I would say never, but there's no immediate plans for that. In fact, as you know, the mattress sensor was deprecated a couple of years ago, and we're right now finishing up collecting study watches. If that sort of, if that's of interest to you, I would definitely check back on the projectbaseline.com website for additional opportunities. They do come up from time to time, but we don't have any immediate plans at this moment.
And I'm looking at some of the questions that were submitted previously. It really does look like we have covered a lot of these answers through the course of the presentation and by answering other live questions today. Taking another peek at the live Q&A. Thank you for your patience. I don't believe I'm able to answer any of the remaining questions live, though I will try to get a few individual answers out to folks. Please do keep them coming if there are additional questions. Here's a question. Maybe Shannon and Ken can take a stab at this one. So what percentage of ongoing participation would you like to have at 1, 2, and 5 years out from today? Are we anticipating a drop in participation as we move to a virtual study?
Well, what I would like, and you know, look, this is a group of participants that has exceeded beyond sort of any clinical longitudinal cohort researchers like wildest dreams what it means to stay connected to a study and what it means to keep participating. So what we've seen so far is a very high degree of interest in continuing into the virtual study, very, very high, which in some ways shouldn't be surprising considering this, you know, the baseline health study participants, but it just remains completely amazing. Now, this is a groundbreaking study. This is a first in kind, and this is just our next step. And I think it's a little bit hard, therefore, to model what this looks like, but I certainly invite and hope that anybody who's interested in participating, that opportunity is available. If you end up with a glitch on your app or you have unanswered questions, that you do reach out to us so we can help every last individual who's interested in continuing to be able to do so. But you know what? Whatever our experience is, I think it's so unique and so novel. I mean, we're right now working through analyzing, you know, what are some of the features of this highly, you know, this group of individuals who stayed in contact with the study and stayed so involved over these years. And I think we'll learn just as much over the next 5 years about that. Someone had a question, I think it was already answered. If they've fallen off the wagon and they've missed an annual visit or two, is there time for one more? So each individual participant has a window within which that a particular year's visit can occur. If you have any question, I would encourage you to reach out and see if that's possible. But you have to be within the window, and that window is fairly extensive, fairly wide, especially since the pandemic. But it's not possible to know for an individual on the call without checking where you sit in your journey.
Yeah, there's still some great questions coming in here, and I think we've talked about a lot of them already. One here is about steps. How many steps a day is really necessary? I mean, initially it was 10,000, and now there's recent data that says maybe less is good, or just as good. Still being a part-time athlete, I always think more is better. That may not be the case, but what we are doing with Project Baseline is we have the ability to look at step count in conjunction with so many other things that may be associated with step count, both in good ways and in bad ways, that we may be able to look at this in different ways than any other observational cohort or study has been able to do. And we've got a whole group, as we talked about on one of the previous events like this, we've got working groups that are looking at various aspects of the data that we collected. We have working groups on mental health issues, working group on cardiometabolic issues. We have a whole working group that's looking at the functional data that we collected. And so you're going to be seeing more coming out about step counts. Shannon's keen interest in sleep, because I'm convinced, if you don't sleep enough, maybe walking more is needed, maybe less walking is needed. And how do you link sleep and activity? How do you link diet with activity? How do you link other comorbidities with activity? That's what we're going to be very interested in. And as a cardiologist, we often think about, well, is it just steps, or is it how fast you're doing your steps and how high your heart rate gets and how much stress you put yourself under when you're doing those steps? So lots to learn. Stay tuned.
100%. And, the baseline health study doesn't just give us an opportunity to look across this incredible breadth of different domains, but then to look longitudinally. And so imagine adding the dimension of time into what Ken is, these questions that Ken is bringing up, how I eat and how I sleep, or how I'm active now, how might that influence my trajectory in 5 years or in 10 years, which is why, the value of longitudinal data is the longitudinality. So again, a plug for sticking with us and continuing on this journey together, because I think the richness, we can really understand in a very unique way the richness of the data that we've collected with the longitudinal follow-up.
Well, Michael, I see we're getting to the top of the hour, and why don't I start us off by once again saying thank you. Thank you to all of the participants for the great effort, dedication, and commitment that you made to this project to make it so successful so far. But as you've heard now, our work is really just starting. I also want to thank the Stanford team for the tremendous care and relationships that they've developed with the participants over the last 5 years. It's really been inspiring for me. And then finally, I'd like to thank all of the team at Verily. And if Duke was on, I would say Duke as well. Work like this needs champions, and we have those at both institutions. Work like this requires tireless energy and commitment. And I'm really happy with the great partnership that we've been able to recognize with Verily to make this a success to this point so far. So thank you as well.
Beautifully said. I have never been part of a research effort with more heart and more dedication and more energy and altruism, I think, than this one. It has been an incredible journey so far. We look forward to the future and continuing to work with Ken and Dr. Spotty Shah at Duke. Thank you to each and every one of you. This is, it's been a very special study, and I hope that continues long into the future. And I hope it continues to inform new science, new observations, new clinical insights that would not be possible without the participation of each and every one of you.
One last final word for me, just thank you to all the participants again. It's been an honor and a privilege to support you with the team here at Verily over the past 5 years. And we look forward to supporting you as your virtual site into the future. You'll be hearing many of the same folks over phone and email should any questions arise. And one final plug, if you have not yet returned a device, please do initiate that return via email. And if you have any lingering questions about medical results that you received during the course of participation, please initiate conversations with the team at Stanford sooner rather than later to address those lingering questions. There aren't many of you, but I do know there are some that might exist. So thank you.